Morning. Good morning.
Aaron's fighting.
The package seems like 4 minutes. I don't know, he does that, he's like,
I don't know how he does it either.
says, I slept there. At least, and the coffee's right over here.
All right, chapter 4, page 28. Does it say video is unavailable? Hold on. Says it's broadcasting. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to go through the whole explanation, which we did last time about the milk and honey. Just very briefly, the milk of the land of Israel represents the idea of the emotions. Milk, mother's milk, feeds the child. Child grows exponentially in the first year and a half of life, which represents the growing of the inner characteristics. That's the emotions. Honey, we said, represents pleasure. And as we discussed at length, the idea of pleasure being true pleasure, which is a pleasure of not needing anything, but being connected to God. We said that the land of Israel represents the idea of being the channel through which we access the higher faith in God. It's the land. We download it. We make it very real for ourselves. And that's represented by internalizing it into our emotions and into our pleasure. In other words, we become integrated in a very real way with the notion of this higher faith. The lower faith is God that we know in our experience. The higher level of faith is the transcendent dimension of God, and our objective through studying the Torah and fulfilling God's commandments is to be able to attain a level of knowledge, of knowing of that higher dimension. Chapter 4, page 28. If you didn't understand any of that or don't remember it, it'll surface again. These levels of honey and milk and honey do not, even so, they do not reach to the level of, and the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, that is quoted by the prophet, that Maimonides quotes, the idea being that even though through our efforts we can achieve a relationship with this transcendent dimension of God, in other words, we can make it real for ourselves, the higher level of God, we still cannot bring it to a level of knowing and feeling and experiencing as it will be in the Messianic era. The idea being that in the Messianic era, we're going to be, God's presence will be so real to us that we'll know God as we know anything else. But the levels of milk and honey are still at the level of faith. Doesn't fully permeate our consciousness to the level of knowledge. To explain this, we see the world as we know it operates within the laws of nature. Morning, boys. How are you today? Those are my grandsons. Yeah, the oldest. That is my son-in-law, and those are my grandsons. Yes, thank you. The older two of our 4 grandsons. 3 from him and his wife, and the other one from my other daughter and her husband. Usually a team member. So the world, he quotes this interesting passage, the world is conducted according to the laws of nature. And that's a quote from Maimonides. Maimonides says that at the beginning, good morning, Boker Tov. How are you? Let's grab a coffee, bagel, etc. Maimonides says that in the first era of the Messianic era, the world will continue to operate as it is. In other words, the laws of nature are going to continue to function, with the distinction being that we will know God, all of humanity will know God. So he says that we see that the world operates within that normal function, within the function, within the rules of nature. Robert, if you don't mind, grab a keep over there. So, which is, as we discussed before, bebechinas memali kol almin, which means as God fills the earth. As we discussed, there's the dimension of God as he fills the earth. That's the dimension of God that we would say is more intimate, right? We know God. Our conscious experience of God is as God fills the earth. God takes into consideration every creation. And then there is a higher dimension as God encompasses the earth, which is where God is transcendent. And he quotes from kind of like a little poetic from Maimonides, from King Solomon, that says, "Sheyesh l'chol eis l'chol chayfetz." There is a time for everything under the sun. Maimonides lists a number of things that are within the normal flow. Things go, things happen. There are times for happiness, times for sadness, times for celebration, etc., etc. That's how it is within the programming of the world. Ki hanachash, at the beginning of history, the snake, the serpent, hitel zuhama b'chava b'chinas knesses Yisrael. So we all know, everybody knows, that the story of Adam and Eve eating from the tree and the serpent, these are not just a simple story. The story represents very profound ideas of the evolution of the spiritual dimension of humanity. So when God created the world, everything was perfect. Everything was great. Along came Adam and Eve, and as a result of the seduction of the serpent, they ate of the tree, which caused to inject, so to speak, into existence a spiritual tainting, a spiritual filth. Chava, Eve is actually not a Jewish word. Eve is a Christian word because it means evil. That's where it comes from. In Hebrew, the Torah says that her name was Chava. The Torah says, Ki hi haisa em kol chai, for she was the mother of all living things. Now, even though Adam and Eve were not Jewish per se, because there was no such thing as Jewish then, but they continued to remain the embodiment of the Jewish people. So Chava, I'm going to use her Hebrew name, Chava, she represents, just like a mother contains within herself. My wife always tells the grandkids, kids don't have that kind of spatial awareness. So we say, you were in your mommy's belly before you were born. And where was your mommy before she was born? She was inside of my belly. So you were really in my belly, right? Which is true in a sense, right? Every apple that we eat originates from the original apple. Every orange that we eat originates from the original orange. Every human originates from the matriarch of all humanity, which is Chava. So her being the embodiment of the Jewish people, the Knesset Yisrael, the collection of souls of all of Israel, so the snake injecting into her this kind of spiritual filth. Good morning. Welcome, welcome. Bagels are available, coffee. So Chava being the matriarch, so the serpent injecting this kind of spiritual filth into Chava represents this kind of tainting of the source of the Jewish people. And it says that that initial injection continued for 7 generations. There were 7 sins, the sin of Cain and Abel, the sin of the Tower of Babel, the sin of the generation of the flood, and so on. And then it says that there were 7 righteous that came and they began to eliminate the filth. It was finally eliminated at the revelation at Sinai. At the time of the giving the Torah, the spiritual filth was removed. But then, unfortunately, there was the sin of the golden calf and subsequent sins which brought that impurity back in. San, you're welcome to take a chair and sit at the head of the table. You can take a real chair. V'achar kach b'mei Yehoshua avdu es Hashem u'v'mei shveit hashoftim kilkelu. Then in the era of Joshua, the student of Moses, they once again served God. And then again, in the generation of the judges, they again did not serve God properly. And then in the generation of King David and King Solomon, the Jewish people were on a highly spiritual level. It says about the generation of King Solomon that the moon, I'm sure it's a metaphor, but that the moon always remained full. And it represents the idea, the moon being at its apex represents wholesomeness, completion. So during the era of Solomon, things were complete, things were whole. But then there was a king known as, good morning, the king Yeravam ben Nevat, who was an idol worshiper and caused many Jews to sin. He built a temple, another temple, not the temple, another temple, and prevented the Jews from going to Jerusalem to pray there. What we see here is this kind of cycle, that there's a generation that comes along and they serve, and then the next generation comes along and they taint, and then the next generation comes along and they serve, and so on and so forth. And so it was in the days of the sages of the Mishnah, and then later in the sages of the Talmud, that every time, every era was different than the one prior to it. So going back to the point how he initiated this, that the world goes about its natural course. This is the way it is. Sometimes we're good, sometimes we're not so good. Sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. That's the way it is. Sometimes spiritually we're plugged in, sometimes spiritually we're not plugged in, which, by the way, is a very important message. Even though that's not the ideal setup, it's an important message as we enter into Rosh Hashanah, because a lot of people carry a lot of baggage with them into the high holidays, right? Come sit down. I don't bite, I promise.
Eat and then I'll sit.
Okay. A lot of people carry a lot of baggage with them into the high holidays. And the baggage oftentimes is misplaced. It's not to say that we lived this year at the level that we ought to, or that we believe we're capable of. But what it does mean is that we are overly hard on ourselves to recognize that God placed the soul in a body. And because God placed the soul in a body, we're going to have struggles. We're going to win some, we're going to lose some. And the key is not to achieve perfection. That's only for the righteous and only for God. But the key is for us to work on excellence. Excellence is, did we learn from our prior mistakes? Can we do it a little better next time around? And why this is so important is because if we strive for perfection, we're going to be terribly disappointed. And when we get disappointed, we usually throw the whole thing out. So it's much more important to embrace our humanity and the fallibility of our humanity and try to do better, but not necessarily enter into with this broad proclamation of transformation. Transformation actually takes place through steps, right? So the more important question is, what steps can we change in our lives that the new year will be somewhat different than the prior year? And at its core, especially Rosh Hashanah, is a day that we reconnect with that essence. We reconnect with God. We reconnect with the commitment. And if we have the commitment, then even with our humanity, we're not going to mess up as often. We're going to stay more connected more frequently. We're going to be more willing to surrender ourselves in those moments of challenge. Okay, but the point of all this is that there's a cycle here. Sometimes things are good, sometimes things are not so good. And he continues, and so times were constantly changing throughout history, where sometimes things were up and sometimes things were down. Now, why is that so? Why are things so inconsistent? That's because we exist in a space, in our conscious space, of God as he fills the earth. And because we exist in a place where God fills the earth, the end result is going to be that we are fallible and susceptible to the changing of times, right? by definition, time is not transcendent. Just the English words, right? Time is immanent. Transcendence means there's no time. But if we live within a space of time, 1 minute is different than the next minute. 1 second is different than the next second. And therefore, there are going to be seconds that things are good, the second that things are not so good. It's changing. That's the definition of time, is that it constantly changes. Now, spiritually, what does that mean? That in the world, things are arranged in the form of a body. Roish, v'yad, v'regel, a head, a hand, a leg. Ushare varim, and the rest of the organs. Shein echad doim lechavere. One organ is different than the next organ. Upula sayevarim ishtanen, and the function of the organs are different than the other. Each one has its own unique purpose. Again, when we're talking about the immanent space, if you and I are exactly the same, then you aren't you and I am not I. There's a passage from the Kotzker Rebbe. Kotzker Rebbe says, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am I, and you are you, and everything's cool. He says the same thing twice, but it means two different things. If I am I only because you are you, in other words, if my whole value comes because of you, then I'm not really I, and you're not really you. I am not to myself, and you are not to yourself. We're here to function. We're here to serve each other. But if the I of I is because I am I, meaning because my inherent value is given to me by God, and you are you because your inherent value is given to you by God, so then I am I, and you are you. One of the challenges in relationships is that people don't know where they end and where the other person begins, right? So it's called codependence in English, right? And when I don't know where I end and I don't know where you begin, then I don't really have a person, I don't have my own identity. And that's not true. It's not true, because if both of us were exactly the same, one of us would be unnecessary. And the reality is that since we live in a finite space, since we live in a world that is as God fills it, then the reality is that we are different. We each have our own unique function. And that's a reality of all of God's presence being immanent in this world. Where God's presence is immanent in this world, it automatically creates distinction. And that's why within a body you have different organs, because each organ has a different function, has a distinction. And again, if the organ if it had the same purpose as the other organ, then it would be unnecessary. This makes sense? Mm-hmm. And the same thing is true with time. If the next minute is exactly like the minute before then one of these minutes is unnecessary. Raf, you want to sit on my lap? No? That's amazing. So if every moment is exactly like the one before it and the one after it, then something's unnecessary here. So I'm saying two things. One is that the reality of the distinction in time is a result of God's being present within the reality of existence. The second point is that it is by design that it is so. Because if we were only transcendent, we would all be unnecessary. Not just you and me would be unnecessary, but all of this would be unnecessary because we wouldn't be able to function. Furthermore, additionally, sometimes one of the limbs is weak and the other one is strong. And that's also because our limbs live within the space of time. within the human experience, within the specific organs, there's also change. Sometimes it falls into our thought, speech, or action, a negative thought or a negative speech or a negative action, and sometimes it falls into our consciousness an idea of being on the straight and narrow. Because as we quoted, like King Solomon says, everything has a time. And furthermore, that this is a quote from the when our matriarch Rivka was pregnant with Yaakov and Esav. So the Torah tells us that she felt this struggle inside of her. And she went to the house of study and she asked the rabbi, what's the meaning behind this? So he says there are two nations within your womb, and they will constantly battle with each other. And when one rises, the other one will fall. So, and that's again a metaphor for the human condition, not just globally, not just cosmically, but within each of us. There are times where the positive dimensions of who we are dominate, and there are times where the negative dimensions of who we are dominate. Like the passage tells us, that Tzur, the capital of Esav, only became established as a result of the destruction of Jerusalem. The point being that Esav's rise to power, the power Esav being Rome, the rise of the West came at the cost of the Jewish people, which, by the way, also is important for us to understand with what's going on in the world today, that we're not going to create equilibrium in humanity. We would like to, but that's not going to happen. That's a messianic function. Because a messianic function is a transcendent one, which creates that equilibrium, until Mashiach comes, we live in a constant struggle. So our actions can't be determined by this utopian notion of creating that utopia. Our action, not that we shouldn't, not that that's not an end goal. It is an end goal, and that we should strive for that. But to think that we're going to accomplish that disadvantages our efforts that we put in now. Right? You don't do the right thing because you're hoping for a right outcome. You do the right thing because it's the right thing. You don't, just like you and I have to be different. I don't get my value from what you think about me. I get my value from what's right. And that's what should drive us. That's what should drive Israel. That's what should drive Jewish people everywhere, is what's my motivation? Am I doing this because I want you to like me? Am I doing this because I want you to get along? Or am I doing this because it's the right thing? By the way, when people compromise for peace and it's not authentic, I'm not saying that compromise can't be authentic, but when compromise is not authentic, then it doesn't hold. Compromise has to be authentic because that's the right thing. But this is all part of the reality of our consciousness, and it's a result of God's being present in the world around us. So, going back to the point that I made before, I forgot that the Alter Rebbe mentions it here. As we enter into a new year, and we could be a little despondent, so the Alter Rebbe addresses this. He says, "Valkain al yipo lev ha'adam alav b'reis shneifel." A person should not be despondent when you see that you've fallen spiritually. It's very easy to lose our footing when we say, "Oh, what's wrong with me? I did it again. I messed up again. Look where I am. I'm at a spiritual low." He says, don't do that, because it's not real. Kikachu seder tapuch zazman. That's the nature of the passage of time. Time changes things. And just like you were able to fall into a negative place, you can transform the negative place into a positive place. Right? Because it's time. The Rebbe once said something really beautiful. The Baal Shem Tov teaches that it says, we say this in the morning prayer, Machadish betuvay b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis. He renews in his goodness and his kindness every day, constantly, the work of creation. So which one is it? Is it constantly? Or is it every day? We have a similar passage about the land of Israel. It says that the eyes of God are upon the land constantly from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. So which one is it? Is it constantly, or is it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? And you might say they really mean the same thing. So then why does the Torah say both of them? And the answer is that there is a constant watching of God, but every moment the world is recreated. The energy of creation is renewed constantly. Every second it's rebirthed. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches that the words that God used to create the world, he's constantly uttering again. So what does that mean? That means that in this moment, we are in a new world. This moment is a new world. It's not the same world that was last minute. It's a totally new world. Think about it. It's a very profound idea. The world that we live in this moment is not the same world that it was a minute ago. So whoever you were yesterday, you're not that same person today. You physically are not the same person because you've been recreated. So what are you schlepping around yesterday's stuff? And for that matter, for people that struggle with anxiety, anxiety is typically about the future. What's gonna be? It's not here now. A whole new world will be created in that moment. So we have to live in the present. So just because yesterday I messed up, just because yesterday the timing, the cycle of time brought me to a place where I'm spiritually deficient, I'm in a new place right now. Totally new opportunity. It's a very profound idea. Yes.
Is God's creation, I'm going to say this, continuous or continual? Is it a flow that doesn't stop, or is it like over and over and over? You said every second, but we visualize it as a non-stop effort, or is it a cycle every second?
Yeah, it's a great question asked by a good lawyer. No, it's a fair question. Good morning. Good morning. Are you here for the class or for the chauffeur? Please join us. You can join us either way, but there's bagels over here. Come find a seat. What's your name? Amel, nice to meet you. I'm Rabbi Schusterman. Welcome. A parallel, pass her a copy, please. A parallel imagery which the Alter Rebbe uses is the beating of the heart. So would you say that your heart is continuous or continual? Continual. Okay. But at the same time, as long as a person is alive, it follows the same pattern. So if you zoom out, it's continuous. If you zoom in, it's continual.
English is my second language. Why this?
Elaborate on your distinction.
What's continual and continuous?
Yeah, continuous means no interruption whatsoever. Continuous or something that happens repeatedly. However, often, but it's still there's stops and starts and stops and starts. Continuous like a flow that never changes.
So the reality is that we don't sense. Do we sense that our heart is beating? Only if we pay attention to it, right? Which, by the way, also the Alter Rebbe has a beautiful teaching. He says that we don't feel our organs unless something's wrong with them, right? The things are supposed to just function. So we don't.
Until it stops.
Right. And then we don't feel it because we're not here to feel it. But if you're only paying attention to your heart's beat when you go to the doctor or something's not right, you're running too fast, you're running too slow, you're not feeling good, something, you start saying, is everything okay with me? But at the same time, the heart is constantly in constant motion of systolic and diastolic efforts, bringing in and pushing out, bringing in and pushing out. If that stopped at any moment, the world, we would cease. And the world is in a similar, there is a heartbeat to existence. It says spiritually there's a heartbeat. Because the world is just like within the body. What is the heartbeat? The heartbeat is the manifestation of the tension between the body and soul. The body wants to stay here, the soul wants to go up. And so there's this pull, there's push-pull. You look at a fire, it wants to jump off the flame, jump off the wick, and the wick holds it down. So there's a tension there. Spiritually, the divine energy that sustains existence doesn't want to be here. It wants to go back to its source. So it's in a constant state of yearning. But at the same time, the physical reality, by God's command, holds that energy in place. There's a Mishnah in ethics that says, against our will are we born, and against our will do we die. That's the tension. The soul doesn't want to come down into the body, but at the same time, once the soul is in the body, it doesn't want to leave, because this is where purpose is. So we have these two energies that are constantly going on, which again creates, the Alter Rebbe says that spiritual energy, the spiritual tension between the divine energy wanting to return to its source and the physical energy holding it down, is what creates time. That's what creates the distinction in time. He says that clearly. The limitation of time, distinguishing 1 second from the next, is a result of the spiritual energy in this tension. There's a movement upwards, and then there's a return back, a second. A movement upwards, a return back, another second. And seconds are also just the human capacity for measuring time, but time is, in a sense, immeasurable.
So how does this concept relate to the other concept that when things happen that we perceive as negative, it's actually a positive because they can't come straight? It's to wake up something within you that you need. Is this related or totally two?
1,000,000% related. It is actually the premise for healthy spiritual thinking, which means like this. If we accept that the movement of time, the change of time, is a result of this spiritual tension that exists, then what that means is that the spiritual energy is constantly, so to speak, choosing to stay here as a mission from God, right? So what happens when we're struggling? When we're struggling, we're moving out of the moment. We're moving out of this moment. We're saying this moment is not about this moment. This moment is about somebody's angry at me, somebody's trying to hurt me, or even maybe God's trying to get me, right? There's all this stuff that's going on. Things are going to work out badly. And then we give all this meaning to all this external stuff, which then removes us from the present. Make it a little cooler in here.
How does this relate to quantum physics? Or it can't?
No, I believe that I'm not a big maven on quantum physics, but I believe that these concepts are intimately connected. The Rebbe was a big proponent of quantum physics. There's a movie, a documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know? Have you ever seen it? It's fantastic.
What's it called?
It's called What the Bleep Do We Know? That's what it's actually called. What the Bleep Do We Know? And it is it explores from a quantum physics standpoint, quantum mechanics standpoint, what goes on between people with energy. And again, it's at the core of it, it's this notion that there's something more than meets the eye. There's another energy at play here. So when we have an uncomfortable emotion, this is actually fantastic modern day science. So what are if you were talking to a child who's throwing a tantrum, what do you want to tell them? What do you tell them if you're and then what do you want to tell them?
It's gonna be okay, you're okay.
Everything's gonna be okay.
Okay, they never listen to that. So what's the next thing we do? Huh? Go to your mom, give them some candy.
They go for it.
Go for it. Yeah. Enjoy, which is a good instruction. It's a good instruction. But what we tell children and we tell ourselves, right, is breathe. Breathe. You're going through a hard time, breathe. Take deep breaths. Rabbi Mendel. You want to ask him just to close the door to the classroom? Thank you. If you don't mind closing the, yeah, it's okay. Just close the door to the classroom. Thank you.
One each do you want?
Thank you.
So what's happening why are we telling people to breathe? Because breath is the core of life. And when you breathe, you stop, you can't breathe And also, if you do any kind of meditation or yoga, right? What's the hardest part of meditation is to stay present in your meditation, right? So what do they tell you? That every time your mind wanders, bring it back to the present. Just bring it back. Don't judge yourself. Just bring it back. Breathing forces us to stay present. Even if it's just in this second where we're taking a breath and we're bringing ourselves back to the present. So when you're experiencing difficulty, discomfort, anxiety, intense emotions, get back to the present. Why? Why will being in the present help you? Why will being in the present help you? Because in the present is God. That's what's there. That's what's in the present. And if you can lean into that, you know that you're okay, even if it feels uncomfortable. Emotions, by definition, are animalistic. They try to drive us away from the present. They want us to be preoccupied with self. They want to move us away from being present to being somewhere else. So when we can be present, right? And there's a lot of tactics, right? Like in AA, they say, play the tape forward. Like be present, play the tape forward. How's this whole thing gonna? Those are good. Those are good tactics. But it's not the real thing. It's not being present because God is here in this moment. So when I'm experiencing challenge, the discomfort of the challenge is all the other stuff. If I can be present in the challenge, meaning I can be present with God in the challenge, I know I'm totally okay because God's running the world and this moment is created by God. You wake up in the morning and you take your first breath and you say the Modani, we mentioned this last time, you say, thank you, God, for restoring my soul to me. It's an anchoring for the whole day. What you're basically saying is, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what went on yesterday, God chose to restore my soul to me. Because if he didn't, I wouldn't be here. So if I'm here, if God gave me life for another day, then that means everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. Okay, if everything is exactly where it's supposed to be, what am I doing here? God put me here for a purpose. Okay, let me exercise the purpose. Like the Mishnah says, it's not upon you to finish the job. We can't play out the story. It's not in our capacity. But the Mishnah then says, but neither are you free to exempt yourself from doing anything. In other words, if God is in the story, then I am here specifically to do my part. And even if yesterday I didn't show up, I didn't fulfill my mission, that's okay. That's okay because God created you yesterday and he gave you life again today. God's telling you that that's part of the program. I mentioned this on Shabbos. We have the concept, King David says in Psalms, Shkiyos miyaven, who can comprehend the mistakes that we make, right? The mistakes that we make are also part of God's plan. Because if they weren't part of God's plan, things wouldn't be the way they are.
That's what you do with those, right?
I'm sorry?
That's what you do with those mistakes is what's important.
Exactly. And think about how many of us today, in this moment, would we be the people that we are if not for the mistakes that we made? We wouldn't be. There may be some things that we rather we weren't, but at the same time, that's who we are. And that gives us our purpose and meaning today in this moment. And you can zoom out and you can look at life circumstances, how many people's businesses were built off of mistakes, right? Errors, misjudgments, incomplete thought processes. I don't remember all the details, but 3M, right? Massive company 3M was born from a technician who was trying to come up with a glue that would, I forget what it was, maybe it was, yeah.
Glue to do something else.
Right, it was supposed to be something else, and then it wasn't producing, and then he said, but wait, we can create these sticky notes, and he did, and 3M was born out of there, right? A multi-bazillion dollar company, right? And how many such things exist in the world? Okay. So v'chol b'chinas mali kolam, and this is all a result of God's presence as he fills the world. This is God as he's found within time. Right, so again, just to emphasize one other point here. If we are able to lean into the moment, if we're able to lean into that experience, then we're able to connect with God in that experience. What does that mean? We're able to connect with God in that experience. That means that we have a relationship with God. When I pause in the moment and I say, this is not a moment of chance, but this is by divine design, I now am in an intimate relationship with God. I'm in a place where I'm knowing God. And that's a result of God as he fills the earth. That's the whole point of everything he said in this chapter. Because God fills the earth, therefore we have the fluctuations of time, that we have the fluctuations of our condition, and we have the ability as a result of that to have a personal relationship with God. 32. But to experience the transcendent dimension of God in a revealed way, in a manner of bechinas das vargasha mamish, at a level where we can feel intimate, so to speak, with that transcendent dimension of God. Right? Again, we're trying to live a paradox here. We're trying to live in the finite space, but connect with the transcendent God. How do we do that? How do we do that? So he says the first thing is you got to get rid of the evil that's within our midst. We can't, which is why in the non-messianic era we can't truly achieve that, because it's only in the messianic era that the prophet says in the next paragraph, the prophet Zechariah says that in the messianic era the spirit of impurity will be removed from the earth. So it doesn't mean that we have to be subject to the spirit of impurity, but we have to recognize that we are limited. We are limited in our experience, that we will not, the spirit of impurity, the bad that's within the world, limits the ability to be transcendent. So it's only in the messianic era when that evil will be, in a very simple way. No matter how intimate one can be with a loved one, there remains distinction between the two people. Because we have a consciousness of self. The more we can surrender the self, the more intimate we can be. But the reality is that our first consciousness is always going to be self. So we don't have to say that's evil, but it is the spirit of impurity. And I'm saying that subtly, like I don't want it to, it's part of the program, right? Part of the program is that we are self-interested. We need that for survival, but it's also just the nature of the human condition. The nature of the human condition is that the first thing we think about when we wake up in the morning is self. Hopefully the second thought is about God. But the nature, look at a newborn baby, as we discussed at length last time. Newborn baby is preoccupied with self. When do I eat? When do my diaper get changed? Right? And even a toddler still is in that space. And our job as parents is to help the child realize that the whole world doesn't revolve only around you. You're here for a purpose. Sometimes we're adults that haven't learned that message yet. Right? But that's the human condition. The human condition is to be preoccupied with self. So no matter how close we're going to get to God, it's still, as the Alter Rebbe says elsewhere, it says, I love you, right? Even a statement of love starts with I. I love you. There's an I first. And even if my love is true and complete, there's still an I in the equation. So by definition, we're not transcendent. So if we want to experience God in a transcendent manner, the first thing that has to be eliminated is the spirit of impurity. We have to eliminate the self. We have to eliminate the consciousness of self. Which was not the case in the first temple. In the first temple, there were false prophets. The second temple, and it said the second temple, it says that there was hatred baseless hatred between individuals. These behaviors of worshiping other gods and hatred between people, this is the counterpart of Keneged B'chinas Amunah Shila Ma'alim Edas. It's the counterpart of faith, of a transcendent faith, right? A transcendent faith says there's only one God, there's nothing else. Nothing else. Not just no other gods, there's nothing else. It says that the people of the diaspora worship idols in purity. The Talmud says that. What does that mean? It means that we give credence to things that are not God. Right? We worship the dollar bill. We worship the body. We worship all kinds of things. So maybe we don't actually bow down to them, right? We don't bring offerings to them, but it is what we give value to. Politics, yeah. Today, that's the worst. Creates such distinction between this separation between people.
God, we trust them, you know.
So what's the meaning behind that? The Rebbe explains that the dollar bill and God we trust is for us to recognize in the dollar that is godliness.
Yes, that's a positive.
Yeah, it's what it's supposed to be. Again, until Mashiach comes, our job is not to shun the material world. It's to channel it. It's to channel it. It's a very powerful. There's nothing like the material world in all of creation. This is the greatest opportunity for divine connection today is in the physical world, in the material world. But not when we use it in the service of self, but when we use it in the service of God. So the behaviors that brought about the destruction of the temples were the counter to this transcendent faith. Where in the first temple, they gave credence to other gods through the false prophets. And in the second temple, there was hatred towards others. I'm sorry?
Sounds like it.
Sounds like now. Yeah, I think it's the function of our history, of human history.
When you're saying that recognition of Hashem as not just the only God, but as, like you said, everything, it reminds me of like sort of the idea of like people that have NDEs and whatnot.
Sorry?
Near-death experience.
Yeah.
They almost all of them come back with this idea that we're all connected and we all go back to source, right? And so I can no longer hate you because we're of the same blood, of the same essence. And even down to like animals and nature and everything. So never heard it said like you're saying it, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Here's another interesting thing. The more we get in touch with this concept within ourselves, the more we live it within ourselves, the easier. In other words, the more we don't judge ourselves, the more we're connected to the fact that we are divine, the easier it is to see others with compassion.
Yeah.
Unless they want to kill us.
Yes, and it's interesting. In the Torah, we have capital punishment, right? What's the purpose of capital punishment? So, according to the mystics, the idea of capital punishment. So, on a technical level, there's a person who their body so controls their soul that they're a danger to people around them. But on a spiritual level, the only way to restore their soul to its connection, they failed in their mission. The only way to restore their soul to their connection is to remove their soul from their body. But it's a compassionate thing. And if someone wants to kill you, as the passage is, Hashkem v'hargei tchila, you have to get up and kill them first. Why? Because your life, they are violating their life. They are violating their connection. But at the same time, we don't rejoice in the downfall of our enemies, as King David says. We don't rejoice in the downfall of our enemies. We're grateful to God that our enemies are no longer, but we don't rejoice in it. We don't celebrate the fact that the divine energy that existed in that person needed to be sent away. So, and by the way, take it a step further. Real strength, not just machismo, like real inner conviction, even when we have to do hard things and harsh things, comes from that place, from a holy place.
Hmm.
When it's not coming from that place, it smells bad, even when it's the right thing. So we need to connect. The more we connect with this, and again, it's a continuum. As long as we live, we'll keep working on it. And the more we work on it, the more compassion we'll have towards ourselves and the more compassion we'll have towards others. The stronger we'll be, the healthier we'll be, the more conviction we'll have. Compassionate conviction, but real conviction.
That translates into at the broader level to preempt the destruction of Israel by destroying, completely eliminating, wiping off the map, regardless of the consequences.
Yeah, again, the guiding of behaviors needs to come from this godly conviction, not ego. When it comes from ego, it's going to be misused. When it's guided by godly conviction, because that's what the Torah says, that's what our tradition says, then that's, we can look back to a very painful period over the last 2 years with the hostage exchanges, right? It's a very confusing issue, right? Because on the one hand, you have lives that are literally at stake. And on the other hand, you're returning people who are murderers, potentially letting them murder again. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's the emotions of the loved ones. There's the emotions of a country. Then there's the responsibility of security for a country. And then there's the whole world opinion, right? Which none of those, well, I shouldn't say the security is a legitimate question, but not people's emotions. I'm compassionate, yes, but that's not a reason to make decisions, nor is world opinion. So the question is security. So now it becomes a security question. And then it's debated on that level. And then ultimately it has to come back to Torah. What does Torah say?
Eliminate.
I don't want to debate it. I don't want to debate it here. I'm saying it's a really hard, it's a hard question. It's a hard question. I know that in earlier times, the Rebbe was very opposed to hostage exchanges. Personally, I believe the Rebbe would be opposed to it now, but there are rabbis that are very respectable rabbis that gave a different opinion. So
There's
again,
limits what price can be paid for a hostage.
yeah, 100%. I don't want to get off. I agree with you, but I think this conversation actually is demonstrating the very point that we will struggle. We will struggle when it comes to areas that are gray in terms of right and wrong. But let that teach us for all the other areas which are not gray. It only is a question of ego, right? Most of our life is not lived in this place of tension. Most of our life is lived in things that are right and wrong. And I shouldn't say most of our life. When we're faced with these big decisions, they're usually black and white as to what's right and what's wrong. That's not where most of life is lived. Most of life is lived actually in the space of not right and wrong, but of the ego and the selflessness. Do I drink this cup of coffee for a purpose, or do I drink it because it tastes good? That's not a right and wrong question, right? That's not an existential question. It's a question of, is my ego in the way? Can I live higher, or am I living selfishly?
That's wrong.
Or less, yeah, fine, less wrong.
Maybe this will kill 1 million and the other will kill 100 million.
Yep.
Still bad.
Right. So, and that's not a moral equation that Torah takes into consideration.
What are other existentialist questions that one can use as a litmus test for women's issue? According to like the Torah.
I think each person in their own continuum has to navigate that. When somebody asks you for, somebody's standing on a street corner, they're asking for help, right? The easy thing for me is to give them a $10 bill. That's the easy thing for me. The harder thing, but there's a question, are they going to use that money to buy drugs and alcohol? Or are they actually going to feed themselves? I don't know the answer to that. The harder thing would be for me to go around the corner and go to a McDonald's and buy them a sandwich and bring them a sandwich. The harder thing would be for me to take them to a job resource and try to help them get a job, right? So what am I going to do? Am I going to do the easy thing and feel good that I did an act of kindness? Or am I going to do the hard thing? Now, let's say legitimately, here's a person who's coming to ask for financial help, and you trust that they actually need the financial help. When I'm giving them, which by the way, the first act should be to give them. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, am I giving them because it makes me feel better, makes me feel good? Or am I giving them because they're in need? Is it an act of kindness? That's our inner journey. Am I helping the other person because it serves a need of mine? Or am I helping the other person because that's what's needed? When I go to work, am I simply there to make money? Or is there other opportunity for me to make my day-to-day mundane activities into something that's more elevated? Mm-hmm. That's the real tension. You know, we don't live in a time, I don't believe anybody around this table struggles with whether they should murder or not. Hopefully, for the most part, nobody around this table struggles with, sincere worshiping of other gods. And I don't think anybody around this table either is struggling with, committing immoral relations. I'm not saying it may never have presented itself, but that's not our daily struggle. We're all good people in that regard. Our struggles don't live in that space. Our struggles, it doesn't mean that we do everything right all the time, but where we do things wrong is typically our ego's getting in the way. Or when we're not doing more good, or we're not doing less bad, it's typically because our ego's in the way. That's where we live. That's where our struggle is. And the more we can connect with our source, with our core, with our soul, the easier it is to let that part of us dominate when we're in a moment of tension.
What's between no ego and ego? What triggers the ego?
What triggers the ego is... What do you mean, what triggers the ego? The ego triggers the ego.
You're doing this with ego and you're doing this without ego. Where triggers the ego to come into play? And
so the ego naturally comes into play. The question to me, the question is not what triggers the ego, but how do I create pause between the ego and the self? How do I create enough pause to see when we're standing in the synagogue on Yom Kippur, right? It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You've been fasting all day. We are plugged in. We're connected in that moment. There's very little ego at play there, both because our bodies are broken down and because it's a holy moment. The presence of God is very real. How do we bring ourselves into that moment in this interplay between ego and self? So the answer is the more, just like I know you're into health, the more you eat healthy food, the less you're likely to take a piece of unhealthy food and put it into your body. Why? Because you know what it's going to feel like, because your body is sensitized to feeling good, to feeling healthy. The more we can sensitize our collective experience. Yes, we all know that it feels good to let the ego for a moment. It feels good to let the ego dominate. But we also know how it doesn't feel good when we actually give into that. Conversely, we know how good it feels when we do the hard thing, but the right thing. So how do we nurture that more? How do we nurture the self to be more available to our consciousness so that we can make a pause between the trigger and the response? I'll give you something from a Torah standpoint and then something from a scientific standpoint. From the Torah standpoint, this is the meaning of the Shema prayer. The Shema says, Shema, listen, here is a process of study, of contemplation. The more we meditate on the fact that Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, meaning that the true reality of everything, which we're doing right here, contemplating this, studying it, and bringing ourselves. You'll walk out of here. I walk out of here every time we study, every time I study. I walk out, at least for a while, a little bit in a little bit of a halo of, okay, there's a different truth than what I'm experiencing here, right? So daily study helps that happen. Shema Yisrael, when we contemplate this, it brings us to V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, you shall love Hashem your God, which means love the transcendent. Don't love your ego, love the transcendent. But then the Shema says, B'chol levavcha, V'chol nafshcha, V'chol meidecha, V'chol levavcha, B'shnei yitzirecha, with both of your inclinations. Don't just love God with your soul, love God with your body too. You can bring the body to a place to say, yes, it will feel good to give into my ego, but it'll feel even better in a different way. It'll feel even better to not give into my ego and to do the right thing. So the body will always be a body. It's always going to be self-interested, but make the self-interest of the body to be the self-interest of the soul. So the Torah way is through study, through meditation, through prayer, through effort, through constant effort. As I mentioned in another class recently, the idea of, in the recovery space, there's a spiritual practice. Why do you have a spiritual practice? Because if you enter into recovery and you don't engage in a spiritual practice, you're going to become desensitized to it, and you're not going to go back to it for the same reason you went to it before, but you're no longer plugged into what drove you to recovery. It's the same thing spiritually. If we're nurturing the spiritual, and again, accept the fact that we're going to be on a continuum, we can't sit and study 24/7. So therefore, we're going to be back in the world, and the ego is going to fire up from something. And it's in that moment that we can say, whoa, I just learned this morning. I plugged into that energy. I'm going to let that dominate the actions that I take or the thoughts that I bring in. I shared this thought, I think, also last week. In the prayers that we're going to say on, we've been saying them every day, and we're going to say them again on Yom Kippur. There's a passage, we open up the ark and we say, don't cast us away in old age. So the question is, like, I'm not old. I wasn't old when I was 15 and saying these things. So what's the meaning of this passage? So as a child, I always thought about it. Don't cast me away in old age. One day I'll be an old man, and I've seen old people, and it's not so great. So don't make, when I get there, it should go smoothly. That's not a prayer for today. That's a prayer for when I'm an old man. So what's the prayer? So I read this great teaching. He says that our behaviors, our thoughts, the things that we say and the actions that we take come from our ego's story. It's a story that we tell ourselves. Why do I get triggered when somebody says or does something? My ego has a story about that behavior. Maybe my parents taught me that story. Maybe my genetics taught me that story. Maybe my life experience taught me that story. But it's a story that gives meaning to a particular behavior that triggers me. Triggering can come from within as well. I see something, I see a piece of food, and I get triggered to want to eat it. There's a story about the importance of that food, or how it's going to serve me, whatever it might be. So the passage is, don't cast me away. Even if I have a story, don't throw me away. Let me change my story. Like there's another commandment in the Torah. It says, Mipnei seva takum, before the elderly get up, which is a really, really powerful, even if you have an existing story, we're constantly bringing in new stories. Try this. I've done this a little bit in the last few days. It was very profound. Something's coming up for you. It's not full force yet, but it's just beginning to come up. Say to yourself, this is a story that's coming up that it wants me to make it old. It wants to settle inside of me. I am going to get up before I let that story get old. I'm going to discard the story.
Trauma.
Huh? Drama. You said drama or trauma?
Drama.
Drama, yeah.
Family.
Yeah, it's drama, it's trauma, it's all that stuff, right? So your mother says something to you, and suddenly the wheels start turning. Now, in that first moment, the wheels start turning, potentially, you can say, I'm not going down that path. I'm going to think about something else. Or I'm going to tell myself something else about my mother in this moment. Right? Boom, you've just gotten rid of the story. Or I can say, no, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let the story, I'm going to let it build. And then it gets a fire, and then all the actions and the thoughts and the speeches follow. So the first thing is to sensitize ourselves. And we do that through study and through. So one of the things that I've been doing the last year and a half for myself, for my own journey in life, is a type of therapy called IFS, Internal Family Systems. I think did I speak about this last time? So it's so aligned with this principle, but it embraces the self as a higher being. It's not necessarily a godly being, but it embraces the self as a higher being, the true self of who I am. And then the parts are all the triggers. And the parts are complex. They're made up of stories. They're made up of genetics. They're made up of all kinds of things. And the process of the therapy, which is quite profound, it's a very simple therapy. But what it does over time is you get in touch, I get in touch, we get in touch with the self. We're not in touch with ourselves. We're just not in touch with it. So when something happens, we don't even lean into the self because it's not available to us. Because we're too blended, we're too meshed together. So when I get triggered, that part of me is not even talking. The part of me that's talking is the triggered part, which is a part of me. It's not who I am. It's a wounded part. It's a child part. It's a story part, whatever you want to call it. It's not the self. So the more we get in touch with self, the more we get in touch with the soul, the more we can become sensitized to that part of who we are. When the ego steps in, we don't stay there. We have that pause where we can say, whoa, the ego has just shown up. I'm going to move away from the ego to my soul. It prevents fighting. It prevents engaging in temptation. It directs us to live more fully in each moment, to live higher in each moment. But it takes work. It takes work. It's not going to happen on its own. Oh my gosh, it became 11:10. How did that happen? Okay. Right, when we die, we won't have any